righty, so this morning we're talking about medical mysteries. Now take a deep breath. Imagine not being able to do that for decades. Our next guest, Barbara Schmidt, has spent 20 years struggling to breathe. We're going to meet Barbara shortly, but first, how it all began. Watch this.
I was dealing with sinusitis. I was in my 20s, so I was just like everybody else, launching into independence and building a life. I decided it was time to address it. An otolaryngologist here in New Jersey, she recommended endoscopic sinus surgery and presented it as very routine and very, very helpful. As time went on, I was developing more and more frequent sinus infections, so I decided in the late 90s that I needed to see another otolaryngologist, and he felt that I needed a second surgery. Immediately, I felt like I didn't have the air resistance anymore. I would take a breath, and then I would exhale, and then after an exhale where you would normally just automatically inhale, it would just trail off, and I would realize I didn't inhale. And so I took these symptoms to my doctor and said, you know, something is really wrong. My doctor was left scratching his head, and I had no answers. I would say within the last 5 to 7 years, I came upon it. It was ENS, or empty nose syndrome. All of the symptomology related to sinus surgery, which I had had. I think of it as you're trapped in a car on a blistering hot day, and the air is thick, it's stifling, a sense of claustrophobia will overcome you, and you'll panic. But eventually you would exit the car and you would breathe. But for people with ENS, there's no escape.
Please help me welcome Barbara Schmidt. Barbara, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
So there were 2 surgeries. How soon did these strange symptoms start?
So after the first surgery, I didn't really sense too much in terms of empty nose syndrome, but I had a lot of more frequent sinus infections. And I was kind of feeling a lot of nausea that really wouldn't go away. But it was the sinus infections that took me a few years later to see the second otolaryngologist.
I mean, you see sort of like a pattern emerging.
Yeah, and so it was 1998 when I saw the second doctor.
And describe again what the symptoms feel like. How does it feel?
So after my second surgery is when I started to really feel the symptoms of ENS. And it started with
ENS, empty nose syndrome. Go ahead.
And it started with kind of more remote symptoms, not exactly symptoms that you would connect with your sinuses. Like I would have a lot of gastrointestinal reflux, and I would have night sweats, drenching night sweats, nightmares, all because the body was trying to wake me to breathe, because my body was not registering the breath. The brain did not get the signal because pathways were severed.
Can't you just breathe through your mouth?
It's not satisfying. You can't really sustain that very long.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's probably true, right? We don't even think about breathing 9
I mean, you
times out of 10.
certainly could, but it's not comfortable.
It's not how you want to lead
Exactly.
your life.
Exactly.
So you had difficulty finding a doctor to help you with this.
Yeah.
Why?
Because it was unknown. It was, it's not really that it was unknown in the community of otolaryngology. They've had information about this for many, many years, but for some reason, we're turning a blind eye.
Were they telling you that it was all in your mind?
No, I never got that. I know a lot of people are callously dismissed by their doctors when they present with these agonizing symptoms. But my doctors just really didn't know what to do for me. My GP thought it couldn't possibly be connected. He sent me for an ultrasound of my abdomen because I was getting a symptom where I would just drift off to sleep, and it felt like somebody, just as I entered like a twilight state, somebody just stomped on my solar plexus, like on my diaphragm, and I would just jolt up night after night, every time I tried to go to sleep.
That was you not breathing?
Not breathing. And I imagine, I don't know for sure because the research is ongoing on this, but I think my diaphragm would like sort of contract to get me to breathe.
To get you air.
Sure.
All right, so the question is, what causes this? I mean, who has to worry about this? And is there any treatment? There is something interesting, and we're going to talk about it right after this break. Don't go away. And we're back now with Barbara Schmidt. She suffers in her breathing because of what's called empty nose syndrome, which is not recognized by some in the medical community. She's joined now by her ENT, Dr. Shubhanoy Das, who is fighting to change all that. He's developed an experimental procedure and is here to talk about that, too. Great to see you, Doc.
Thank you very much.
All right, so is this a thing? Is this a real thing? Because I know some doctors say it's all in her head, this isn't a real thing. You know, Barbara should be seeing the psychologist instead of an otolaryngologist.
Yes, it's definitely a real thing. I've now seen hundreds of people with a very similar type of symptoms. Problem is, we don't have a very good objective test to be able to tell who is suffering from this from who is not suffering from this.
What would cause her to not be able to breathe? You know, like there's no obstruction, right? So...
Right. We think you're physically able to breathe. The problem, I think, is that you have a difficulty sensing that you're breathing. We have these fine nerves called autonomic nerves that connect from our turbinates to our brain, and it's likely those get damaged, and so you can't sense breathing.
So because a lot of people have sinus surgery, so to people out there considering sinus surgery, do they need to worry? Like this could be a side effect of it?
This is almost never a side effect of sinus surgery. It's a very rare side effect of turbinate surgery, which is nasal surgery to straighten your nose or for sleep apnea and such. But just like the child who had that immune reaction to the dog lick, there are probably several circumstances that are necessary for somebody to suffer this, and we just don't understand what those are.
All right, and so Barbara, what has he been having you do to help with this?
So Dr. Das, I had been watching, I found him on a forum after I finally found, after years of searching, because I knew this was connected to my surgery, I finally found it online, which led me to a forum, and I saw there are a few doctors nationwide that are treating this. And I watched carefully because a lot of them were doing implants, and I just felt that maybe that wasn't a good idea for me because I sensed that this might have to do with nerve damage, and if you put things in there, you're going to disturb more nerves. So Dr. Das I found because he does tissue regenerative therapies. So he does injections of PRP and ACell is what he used on me, into the turbinate tissue.
And is it helping?
Yes, it is.
All right.
It is helping.
So you get like a needle in the nose?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ow.
Yes.
But better to breathe.
Right.
Right?
We numb you up very well.
I want to tell you that we reached out to the American Academy of Otolaryngology. They say, look, we recognize the symptom complex that's been described by some as empty nose syndrome. They say there are a number of our members interested in this problem, and an empty nose syndrome study group meets regularly to discuss it. There's currently not a specific code applicable to this disease process. It hasn't been like officially labeled as a disease, but it sounds like they are very open-minded to this and are looking into it. And I'm sure you are not the only one suffering, Barbara. Thank you for coming on national television to talk about it. Doc, thank you as well. We'll be right back.